So welcome to episode 31 of the Radical English Gentleman podcast. Today we are joined by a guy who I've been in contact with for absolutely ages, and finally we've managed to grab this interview. So it's an absolute pleasure to be joined by the one and only, the infamous Dr. David Cartland.
I'm uncensored. Yeah, first thing I'll say, Rory, is apologies for the fact it's taken this long. Life's been busy, and finally we've got each other. So yeah, great stuff.
Yeah,
I admire what you do, by the way. So
cheers. So the first thing I want to go into is your credentials, because there'll be a lot of people who listen to this who may be skeptical of who you are, like what you do. Are you just some random guy on the street? Like, what are your credentials? Yeah.
Well, luckily I've got my certificates just here actually, so I can read off them. So I'm a GP as it stands. So I'm a GP that's got kind of multiple strings to my bow, in that I used to be an A&E GP, an urgent care GP, a bog standard, GP in the community, urgent care GP, etc., etc. I've been doing that now since 2000. Just looking at the degrees, 2014. I qualified as a doctor in 2008, so many moons ago. So a fair bit of experience postgraduate as a doctor, but I'm slightly different to other doctors in that other doctors do their 5-year degree at university when they're sort of after sixth form, and they go straight through 5 years and straight into the workplace. So I went a bit of a long-winded route and did it as a graduate degree. The first degree was, surprise, surprise, it was in biomedical science, but with a special interest in immunology and virology, which has come in handy to tie my colleagues up a knot, because you can write what they know about virology on a sort of post-it note. And so that was the first degree, and I got a first class honours in that. And in between the two degrees, I went on and did a master's, and that was in cardiovascular science, cardiovascular medicine, and became a published scientist for that. I've done 3 papers where I was either first or second author. So
wow,
yeah, that's my credential. So plenty of experience, and hopefully, get a foot in the door of a conversation with a fellow doctor. But that's not happened. But we'll come to that, I'm sure.
Interesting. Yes, hell of credentials there for sure. Because I think a lot of people, they think when people talk about things to do with the vaccine and things of that nature, it's kind of just people kind of take it as a grain of salt. But actually hearing the credentials, what you've gone through, what you've learned, really consolidates a lot of what you're saying. I really do think.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that that's good to kind of get that validation when you get into a conversation. But actually, some of the stuff that I point out to people, it's not that deep. It's very basic around ethics. It's very basic around statistics. Like all the medical statistics I ever knew was from that first degree. So again, doctors don't really learn that kind of evaluating a scientific paper kind of stuff or medical statistics. But I'm not talking rocket science. It is kind of ethics 101, things like, what we're going to talk about probably about informed consent and bodily autonomy and things like that. So I'm not kind of going deep with doctors here, but yeah, it's not happening.
So I want to go into the story of Dr. David Cartland. So I saw a lot of interviews with your story, but for my audience, can you explain what happened? Because from what I gather, you resigned over the COVID-19 vaccine as kind of a baseline, but what happened at your surgery or the place you're working at? Why did you leave? And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll sort of break it down into as quickly as I can because it's a long period of time, but obviously I was there day one as a doctor during the pandemic, when it was announced. And I was working back in the Midlands then. So I've been down in Cornwall for 2 years nearly now. And the first year was pretty much me picking up, just watching and observing and looking and seeing what was going on. All I would say, and to summarise that first year of the pandemic up pretty much, was it was damn quiet. Very, very quiet, to the point where all of us had half-filled surgeries. We were doing all this telephone consultation. And it just felt a little bit odd because you'd go home to the BBC and you'd find sort of people in their hazmat suits. If they weren't TikTok dancing, they were, looking pretty drained and tired, exhausted. And that didn't correlate. And in my spare time during these very quiet surgeries, I would then work with the local politician to take food to these heroes of the NHS. And I'd go to the local ITU departments and A&E departments to go and deliver Domino's pizzas to them. I was that bored. And gave them over to the A&E team, and they were there doing the nails and chatting around to each other and looking distinctly unbusy. And so it's just that kind of observation for the first year, and it had nothing to do with my experience down in Cornwall. Came down here for lots of different reasons, and again, very quiet, going through the pandemic. Then came the sort of vaccine, the saviour of the planet, and the sort of what is this vaccine? I've not heard of this technology that we're using before. And my sort of ears pricked up. I sort of kept quiet still, kept very quiet in the background, just observing, just observing. I didn't want to, put my foot in it or um, appear insane. But yeah, anyway, so long and short of it was I had a vaccine myself. So, I was all part of the fear campaign, doing my bit for saving my granny, etc., as we were being told. And I rolled up my sleeve mainly because of my friend who passed away actually with COVID, allegedly COVID, I'll say. And it was a knee-jerk response to that. And some 2 months later, you get a tap on the shoulder again to say, you need another vaccine. It's like, that's a bit odd because normally I just have an annual flu jab. That does me. In fact, no one's chased me around for a flu jab for the last, 2 or 3 years. They ask me, I say no. End of story. And so I had the second one after being chased around really by a previous employer, so the one I left that you mentioned I resigned from. Just asking incessantly, you need to have it. There's a mandate coming, surprisingly. There's a mandate. And I said, when have we ever mandated medical treatments ever? That just doesn't sit right with me. And at that point, obviously, they were starting to sack carers. Carers were being made redundant because they weren't having the vaccine. I mean, this is stuff that I've never heard of. People are allowed to refuse consent, even if it's for the most wacky reasons. If you give them the data and the evidence and the case law and they decide against it, that they're more than able to do that. So anyway, so I had the tap on the shoulder. I eventually just had the second jab. Now, it knocked me about, to be honest. I've still never been right since the second jab. Nothing major, not like some of the major vaccine injuries that I'm hearing about at the moment. But yeah, so the second jab came and then didn't have much side effects from the second one. The first one gave me sort of lying in bed for 3 days with a headache, etc. Just didn't want to have the third one. Got a knock on the door at my neck surgery that I worked at saying, you need a third one. To which I nearly fell off my chair. How many of these are we going for now? That's 3. I'm not having it. I said, and at that time I was noticing very much that the people that were getting COVID, what we're seeing now actually, back in September, October, the people getting COVID and getting more unwell with COVID were the people that were treble jabbed, which should have protected them from getting COVID. That's what we were promised, wasn't it, by Fauci, Gates, all the big hitters, in the government. If you have this vaccine, you're going to save your granny. You're not going to catch and spread. You're not going to get really poorly, and you're not going to die of COVID. Well, we'll probably come to it a bit later that that's just not the case. But going back to that, so I challenged my boss to prove that I needed the vaccine, and he asked me to prove that I didn't need it. So I looked at an audit and basically found that everyone that had COVID for a 2-week period were treble jabbed. There was a single double jab and a single unjabbed. And there were 0 unvaccinated. And I got a really flimsy reason, something like the unvaccinated just don't care about their health, they're not getting tested. So I went back to the data and proved that 70% of the negative tests were the unvaccinated. So that was thrown in the dustbin. And that's where it kind of started, that deep dive into the data, the trial stuff and all that sort of stuff. I mean, nothing instills trust in a doctor than a drug company that tries to hide its data for 75 years and takes out emergency use authorization indemnity. That itself. Seeing really simple things like the testing, nonsense, PCR. I've done PCR myself. I know what it's about. It's not for the purpose in which it's being used. Things like asymptomatic carriage didn't make any sense whatsoever to the degree that it was being used to shut down society and businesses and sending people into quarantine and things because 1 in 3 people could have a killer disease yet not know they had it. And then we're using ridiculous stats like 28 days, death was being counted within 28 days of a COVID test being positive. So, you could get run over by a tractor out here and they could scrape your remains off the floor, do a swab test and your death would go down as COVID, even though you've been run down by the local tractor. And it just didn't make sense. And these really simple things, like I say, I'm not going deep into it. This just doesn't make sense scientifically. And it kind of comes to the fore that I was upsetting a lot of people with these wild views, like, this is an experimental gene therapy. I mean, I've read out on some interviews I've done previously from the government websites that say it's a gene therapy, from the Pfizer and Moderna documents that say it's a gene therapy or an immunomodulatory treatment. And people weren't being told this, and I was witnessing consent being gained, which was just roll up your sleeve, Doris. Any reactions to the first 2 and even to the degree of giving the injection. When you give an injection, you're supposed to stick it into the muscle. It's called an intramuscular injection. It's not an interarterial or intravenous injection, hence we'd call it that. And it was going straight into the deltoid, plunged the drug straight in without doing what's called an aspiration, which is a very simple technique. You put a needle in, if you get blood flash back, then you're in an artery, you don't proceed to inject. And they were getting like unqualified people vaccinating, and then the groups were getting younger and younger and younger. And just had a bit of a, I had a crisis meeting with my boss, and it kind of came to a head really because privately, a lot of these doctors agreed with me. The ones that would give me 2 minutes of their time, I really agree with. We shouldn't be vaccinating children, Dave. We should not be doing this. There's no evidence for it. Managed to pin one of my colleagues at a local pub here, and he said, I wouldn't have agreed with you 8, 10 months ago. I do now. There's absolutely no case for vaccinating children. And I remember the words he used were the safety data is damning that you presented. The very next day in the coffee room, which is the day I tendered the resignation because there was so much tension in the building about me. I mean, people were calling me names,
Wow.
being really aggressive to me. You're a COVIDiot. I don't want to hear your conspiracy theories. This is my coffee break. This is my downtime. I don't want to hear you whispering on about safety data, myocarditis in children. I don't want to hear that nonsense. I listen to the BBC, nonsense like that. And anyway, the two doctors that had agreed with me the prior day were the only two that remained in the room because everyone else stormed out of the room. I was a bit upset because of, I'm just trying to present data on, children, safety in children, and they just walked out, calling me names. And the two doctors assured me at the very end that, this is not something we're going to proceed with. This surgery will not vaccinate children. The very next day after I leave, or I tendered my resignation, it was accepted with immediate effect to go on garden leave. So 3.5 months I've been sat at home, being paid for, not being out. It's just a silence me, I guess, get me out of the building. Yes, I did resign, but it's because I was faced with these doctors who, so to finish that story off, these guys then advertised the next day the vaccine clinic for children, get your 12 to 17-year-olds down to this surgery and get them jabbed, to which I kind of said, look, what are you doing, guys? You said, you looked me in the eye yesterday and promised me that you weren't going to do this. The data isn't there. These are children. There's absolutely no children are dying from this disease. The amount of Omicron we're seeing at the moment, it's like a pussycat compared to if there was ever a lion involved. It's like a lion to a pussycat. The virus, and that's normal virology. Viruses get less and less severe. And they're parasites. Ultimately, they live within a host. You don't want to kill your host. That's not good survival plan, is it? And so anyway, they sent the kids down to the vaccine centre, and that's the last I heard. I mean, since then, I've not heard from any doctors or nurses from both previous surgeries that I've mentioned. They blocked me on social media. They don't converse with me. I caught an email that I was CC'd into saying if Dr. Cartland tries to speak to you about COVID, then do not engage with him and direct him to the practice manager, who secretly, by the way, agreed with everything I said and actually tendered a resignation in the surgery about mandates. That was the other thing, mandates. At the time, we had 2 women that they were going to sack 2 women from the surgery who refused vaccines for their own reasons. I'm not going to go into that, but they were mortified. They were stressed. They weren't sleeping. At that same time, I was hearing colleagues from the Midlands ringing me up saying, look, I work from home. I do triage for the out of hours. I'm being told I need to have a vaccine to protect me and to protect patients. And I work on a Zoom call. I mean, where's the sanity in that? And one of them actually went ahead and had the 3rd vaccine and had went into palpitations, SVT afterwards, had to go to hospital, thought it was a blood clot on the lung. And, there's a million of these tales that I can tell, but it's clearly not a safe intervention. The trials suggest that. And that's a long story short. I know I've whittled on a bit, but apologies for that.
So let's get it straight. So you disagreed with the ethics of vaccinating young children with the COVID vaccine. You were seeing the data, you were seeing first-hand experience with patients and colleagues and their views, and then you handed in your resignation, and then you kind of got completely blacklisted from the medical community in your local area.
I mean, but I forgot to mention that obviously in that time I've tried my best to escalate my concerns to the partners, to see salary doctors, even in the coffee room, just trying to get engaged and say, guys, are you guys seeing what I'm seeing? I'm seeing so many more blood clots, I'm doing so many more cancer referrals, loads of people having period problems. And this was way back in October, and that's subsequently borne out in the data that we've seen about the issues around neurological stuff. I've seen weird dermatological skin issues. And I was only doing 2.5 days a week. I thought if in 2.5 days I'm seeing all this stuff, are the other guys seeing it? And again, just, so many silently in agreement, but, we've got a mortgage, we've got our reputation, we don't want to get in trouble. And I can bear out exactly that is true. And we'll come to that probably a bit later on in the interview, that they've come calling for me, the professional bodies, let's say.
Can you kind of go into that a little bit? I know certain things legally you can't, but can you explain what's actually been happening in your own circumstance with Public Health England, and is it the BMJ?
It's the GMC, which is like the
GMC.
General Medical Council, and then it's the NHS England, which is kind of like they're kind of above that. So the GMC are your council that represent you as a medic, and you pay good money to be part of that. But anyway, I got an email, essentially, quick story email came into my junk box, junk email, and I just spotted it by complete chance because my memory was full on my phone, getting rid of all the rubbish on it. I looked in it, and it was a letter from NHS England saying, just to let you know, this is a transcript of the decision that was made about you at the fitness to practice hearing that was had about you. And that was the first I heard of it, some junk email letter that had been dumped in my, spam folder. To which I replied, what the hell's going on, or words to that effect. And essentially, they'd had a case about me without my ability to A, represent myself, and B, I didn't even know I was oblivious to it happening. But the case was in my favour. So there's a case with a doctor called Sam White and PJH Law, and they took it, quite high up the court system and won about doctors having a presence on social media that was against the narrative. And they tied the GMC up in knots, and they won the case. It's kind of a landmark case there. And so on the basis of that, they said Dr. Cartland's views do not align with ours. However, we're going to forward, he's got freedom of expression on social media, albeit social media have banned me, every single one of them now, fully censored as the spreader of misinformation, where everything I do is fully referenced.
And you got, yeah, can you explain that? Because you recently got back on Twitter, and your Twitter was absolutely popping off, wasn't it?
Yeah. At the end of the minute, I'll just finish off about so NHS England. So NHS England sat with me about 3 weeks ago. They kept putting off the meeting again, so that's quite stressful. We're going to meet with you. No, we're going to put it back a month, etc. And eventually, they met with me, 2.5 weeks ago, and I met a panel of GPs, very senior in the area, and essentially let me present. So they asked me to write a reflection on what my concerns were, and I wrote a wonderful piece with a colleague that, we're firing on all cylinders. 3 pages, very succinct bullet points, with 15 pages of references from published studies. So that was it. They had an 18-page document. I don't think half the people had even read that document. And it was, I'll send it to you, or you can share it. I've posted it on social media. Brilliant piece, really. And they let me speak about it. And at the very end, the conclusion was, look, we're not here to discuss that. I said, well, have you got any views on the fact that, as a whistleblower, I should be able to make my concerns known as a doctor that's concerned about something that just doesn't feel right? I stand to be corrected on this. I'm prepared to be wrong. Show me how I'm wrong, and I'm prepared to learn. That doesn't seem to be reciprocated. But at the end of the day, they just kept going full circle around on, Dr. Cartland, you seem very obsessed with COVID. I said, well, I am obsessed. I'm obsessed with patient safety. I'm obsessed with ethics. I'm obsessed with not harming children and pregnant women. When I tried to prescribe a hemorrhoid cream the other day for somebody, and the pharmacist wasn't happy to give it because it was a pregnant lady, but he was probably the same pharmacist that's vaccinated her with the gene therapy, mRNA technology. So, double standards. So anyway, the end of that was they tried to sort of allude to, I'm not going to say they said I was mentally unwell, they didn't, but there was a lot of alluding in that meeting that, you need to seek medical help, practitioner help program, get your head right. Must be very stressful, doctor, being in this situation, not being heard and stuff. There's a little bit of empathy there, but that was it. Case was closed. I mean, the GMC complaint, by the way, came about as we're now going into social media the GMC these days are taking screenshots from Twitter trolls as evidence against the doctor's fitness to practice. So I was given all the evidence that had been presented for that fitness to practice case, and it was about 12 or 13 documents of anonymous cowardly people who have written. Even people in the village here that had said, like, Dr. Cartland was off work, sick. He was on Twitter. That was one of the complaints, actually, genuinely, that Dr. Cartland was very active on Twitter. And the rest were kind of accusations of misinformation, spreading these dangerous conspiracy theories around the internet without giving any specific evidence. They did catch me out on one where I did put Harold Shipman on a global scale. I do regret that. Probably shouldn't have put that, on reflection, but that was one of the screenshots. So, and that was it. That's the end of it. So ridiculousness. So yeah, social media, wasn't it?
Yeah, Twitter. What happened with Twitter?
So Twitter, right at the beginning, I set up a Twitter. Like I said, I've tried every which way but loose to get heard by the proper people. I offered to present to the CCG, etc. At that time, I wrote a piece called "Breaking the Silence." I don't know if you've read that yet,
I've
but
it's kind of
it's a big long read. It's a bit of a bedtime story, really, if you wanted to read it. Talking through the logics of what didn't seem right with the asymptomatic carriage, the testing, etc. And it went viral very quickly on Twitter. with the help of other people promoting it. I don't think I was on there for 2 weeks, and then suddenly just got you're suspended for spreading misinformation. At about the same time, I was suspended from Facebook. I mean, they put various restrictions on these things, like Facebook ban you for 12 hours and put you lower down the feeds, so people don't see what you're posting. It's a full-blown 30-day ban. So I'm on a 30-day ban at the moment for Facebook for posting a Lancet article. Prior to that, it was a back-to-back ban for posting a BMJ article. I mean, I've been banned on Instagram for doing just a meme with a tumbleweed going across the screen. And that was, I don't know what rule that actually broke, but that was a 12-hour ban. And if you find me on Instagram, I'm down under a banner of Dr. Cartland. Don't click on him because he spreads misinformation around COVID. It's got safe issues. But Twitter, got shut down, went back to it, reinvented myself. As just as Dave Cartland, 1982, went on for about 3 weeks, came across every troll in the country. You know, you were a murderer, spreader of misinformation, you're dangerous, you're a quack, grifter. I've learned all sorts of internet words. And then shut me down again. They just shut you down, you're suspended permanently. Third time round, I tried a little different angle, went for Dr. Jab, 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 which I think it was flying over people's heads, a parody that was involved. I was like, we all need to listen to Bill Gates. He's an absolute legend. He's so qualified, and the sarcasm and stuff. But that didn't really take off. But again, the trolls found me again. Same trolls, by the way, in each case. Same group of, God knows who they are, where they come from, allegedly 77th, whatever that is. And they find you. Anyway, so that got shut down. So I tried Dr. Boost. And at that point, I was hearing about some of my colleagues being reinstated into Twitter. So I wrote a strongly worded email saying, look, you can't call it misinformation without giving me evidence of the misinformation, so we can at least have a chat about it. Sent this email into this nebulous Twitter email appeal system and threatened legal action, which I fully intend to pursue, actually.
Wow.
And within an hour of sending that email, my original account came back. And I went from whatever 8,000 followers that it picked up. It reinstated it as it was the day it was shut down. And over 24 hours, it went up to something like 40,000 people. Loads of support, loads of connections, loads of offers of interview, like-minded people. But the real thing that I miss now is doctors that were starting to wake up, getting in touch, saying, Dave, you know, we've seen your testimony. You're really brave. Let me tell you what's going on. And, you know, I've been vaccinating children and I really regret it. I've woken up. And I've lost that because they shut you down. Label it misinformation. There's no appeal this time, and you lose all those connections of like-minded people. So yeah,
wow.
Censorship. LinkedIn have got me shut down for. I mean, LinkedIn is a professional network, and I do an article. I do an article where I'm stood there like this, and I'm reading off. I'm holding the documents up. I don't know if you saw the Sonny Polson one you said, and I'm reading off the MHRA website, the government, the yellow card system, the Pfizer documents, the Moderna documents. I actually talked through a trial with pregnancy. And I'm reading off the page, and they banned me for misinformation, even though I'm reading off their website. So I'm banned on LinkedIn, banned on Facebook again. About 4 days left to run on 60-day bans. Twitter suspended permanently. Instagram, I've got the shadow ban on me. So yeah, it seems that a neurologist with all that experience is dangerous.
That is just crazy. And it's
I'm on Getter and Truth Social apparently is coming to the UK. So I can't.
Yeah, you're on Getter. Your Getter hasn't been shut down, which is good. Yeah, guys, follow him on Getter. No one's probably listening who has Getter, but download Getter and follow him.
The thing is, you don't get any trolls. I mean, if somebody's disagreeing with you, you have a conversation about it. It's very civil. You don't get people calling you names or, you know. I mean, there's a load of parody accounts on Twitter. I mean, there's one that's called, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this.
Yeah.
It's basically Dr. Cartload of shit. So that was it, Dr. Cartload, because my name's Dr. Cartland, and there's a picture of me with kind of eyes, like cartoon eyes, horns coming out of my head, drooling, and he's spread it. I mean, there's channels set up about me, there's these trolls, and they literally just, all my posts they take and they manipulate, cut and paste, add things and take things away, and they're all part of this kind of bot army. I don't know, I'm new to all this stuff, but censorship like I've never seen before. And strange people. I don't know who these people are or what their objective is or who pays them.
It's so weird. And you're part of Heart Group, aren't you?
Yeah, part of a few groups actually. So Heart is one of them. Again, we get made out to be a crazy bunch of anti-vaxxers, but it's absolutely jammed full of people with the right credentials. You know, epidemiologists, doctors, retired doctors, current psychologists and psychiatrists, and you know, we try writing letters to the right people. So we've been writing letters all the way through it. I mean, I've only come to Heart in the last 12 months, but I'm a co-signature on a lot of the later letters. And, you write a letter to the JCVI saying, we're really concerned. Here's the evidence. Here are the references. Why are we doing this? And the JCVI seems to be able to get away with ignoring it. So then you go up a peg and you go to Van Tam, Whitty, all these different people. You write it again and say, look, I've written to the JCVI, no response after 3 letters. Here's one straight to your doorstep, and they ignore it as well. We've just done another one about children's vaccinations, and full of evidence. It's not like we're quoting the Daily Mirror or anything like that. We're quoting published epidemiology, government data, and it just gets completely ignored. And we're talking about children. I mean, that's been the 2 soapboxes for me, aside from consent and all the ethics around basic consent. And the second thing is children, and the third thing is pregnant women. In a world where when you see a pregnant woman, for example, in your clinic, first thing you do is take them off every medicine if you can, because nothing's tested. And I always say to pregnant moms, we've got to get you off this, because you go into the British National Formulary, which is our kind of drug Bible, as it were, and nothing's got any kind of evidence, because you'd hope no one would queue up out the door to see if we could harm their baby with this new drug. But unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the approach taken with COVID, and an experimental therapy that has never been used before. It's a novel therapy. No one can deny that, because there's never been an mRNA used. And I mean, as widespread as they've gone worldwide with this novel technology. And we're seeing more and more now that the evidence is that it doesn't do what it says on the tin, which is, stop you catching and spreading, stop you getting unwell and going to hospital, and stop you from dying. The stats from the UK HSA or the Office of National Statistics, it's very clear. I mean, they stopped publishing it now, the UK HSA data, because it was that blatant that about February, March time, that like 90% of deaths from COVID were in the vaccinated group. 90% of admissions with COVID were in the vaccinated group. So where were these unvaccinated dead bodies that we were expecting? Just didn't add up, and that's the reason you take a vaccine, to stop you catching, spreading, and becoming unwell and dying is the ultimate harm, I guess. And it's just not doing that. I mean, all the people I know now, just rolling the time forward, that have got COVID. I mean, all the 2 places I work now, all the doctors are off with COVID, probably the 2nd or 3rd bout, and you sort of politely ask them, have you had the jab? Should this be happening? Have you had the jab? And they say, yeah, it's just wore off. The booster's coming in in autumn. So I'll get my booster. And the second thing is, you've heard it before yourself, I'm sure. Imagine if I hadn't had the vaccine, how poorly I would be. Well, I've spoken to many people that are unvaccinated and did get Omicron. And if it's a cold, that's about as bad as it gets. And I've spoken to these people individually to see, so I'm not just making that up. I hear the senior medical doctors saying about this Omicron as it's burnt out. It's an endemic part of what was. They're all agreeing that COVID is. I mean, I keep hearing the phrase COVID was yesterday's news, or COVID was so 2021. But we're still pushing it, and we're still making doctors wear masks in buildings and testing. I mean, it's incredible. And then they make kind of a rod for their own back by my situation, as I told you on the phone the other day, was that I'm not able to work at the moment because I wouldn't wear a mask in a heat wave. So I've been asked to not come to work until I comply with that mandate. And all I've asked my employer is that, can you show me the policy firstly, and show me the evidence for that policy? And by the way, I feel quite poorly when I have a mask on all day in this heat. It was 32 degrees, I think it was, heaving department. And no, I'm sorry, you need to wear a mask, otherwise you can't work. I said, well, why? For health and safety. I said, well, I've just told you it makes me feel poorly. And then I said, I've given a negative COVID test today to come on duty, so I haven't got COVID. So if the rationale is that me coming into the surgery without a mask on is that I'm going to give some little old lady COVID, then I've got a test that says I haven't got COVID. So you kind of tying yourself up there. And so the response we got to that was, well, it might be a false negative. To which my response was, well, what's the point of testing then? Why, if you don't take a negative test as gospel and allow the doctors to work? I keep using the analogy of, if you go out in the rain and you choose to wear a coat, or you don't choose to wear a coat, it's your choice. If you get wet, you get wet. It's your decision. Same thing here. The mask is a personal protective equipment, PPE, personal for you. So if I don't want to wear it and I get COVID, that's my own risk, isn't it, to take? So I've not been allowed to work the last 2 weeks as a fully able-bodied doctor with a negative COVID test before each potential shift, just because I won't wear a mask in this heat. And it's pretty hot down here. And they ban fans as well. They ban fans from our hospital.
Why?
Because it spreads virus particles around, apparently.
Oh. Wow. And so, back to, I want to go into specifically infertility. So I've seen you on Twitter and you spoke about infertility and how you're seeing some very dangerous safety signals. And I don't know if you recently saw the documentary Unvaccinated. Have you seen it?
I've seen it back in the day. It's
Ah.
not fresh in my mind, but yeah,
Mm.
it did talk about that, didn't it?
Yeah. So like what I guess like what is your view on infertility to do with the vaccine?
So recently, I published again on these Twitter places and the birth rates. So we look at birth rates to start with. So the birth rates across the board. I think 2 weeks ago there were a lot of graphs coming out showing that in this last quarter of time, the birth rates have dropped by about a third in a plethora of countries. So the data there shows that there has been a reduction in live births. So that firstly is a bit of a concerning trend when you see that there's a third less babies being born. At a time where really, husbands and wives are locked up in lockdown in their home together, you'd expect a kind of increase in birth rates, if you see what I'm saying. But that's not the case. So that's number one. Number two is there are studies that show they look at expression of the spike protein. So as you know, the vaccine is there to induce your body to produce a non-human protein, probably the most pathogenic part of the virus. So I keep telling people to say that slowly back to them in a dark room. Say it back to yourself. You're training your body to make a protein that is not human. It's a viral protein. And we don't know whether that can be regulated or how it switches on and how it switches off, what cells it goes to, how it's distributed through the body. But the reason I mention that is because studies have shown that two of the most potent places where this spike protein is expressed organ-wise, number one is the testes of a male, and it's number two is the ovaries of a female. So you're causing inflammation, and inflammation can cause damage to those organs of ovaries and testes. So in and of itself, that's a concerning problem for the population, really, if people's testicles and ovaries are swollen and inflamed. And there's other studies around, I think Mike Yeadon spoke a while ago now about the expression of the spike protein in the placenta, so the organ that feeds the blood and the oxygen from the mom to the baby while the baby's in the uterus. And there's expression of that spike protein in that very intimate barrier between the mom and the baby. Do we know what that does? Of course we don't know, because there's no studies ever been done about the significance of a toxic spike protein in that particular vicinity of the human body. So it's just massively open to potential harm, and that's one of the harms you picked, really, in
Wow.
terms of infertility. But I would absolutely say it's not good for people's fertility.
Mm. And specifically on the Pfizer documents as well, because I saw you on BMT. Is that what it's called, BMT?
Mm.
Yeah, I saw you.
And BT, yes.
Yeah, you stayed up to read the Pfizer documents. Can you go a bit into what the Pfizer documents showed? Yeah.
It's a large area, Rory. I'll be honest. It's a massive,
Yeah, I
massive
know it's a
project.
massive
That's
document.
probably a 2 hour answer, to be honest. But I mean, the bit I can talk about the bit that I did a lot of work on
Yeah,
in
yeah,
terms of
yeah.
in my interview. So, and it's a pretty good example, really, of what you see across the however many thousands of pages. So, firstly, I'd say is that doctors don't know what that document is. So you can ask a doctor, pick a doctor, any doctor. Do you guys know what the Pfizer documents are? The Pfizer dump. These documents that were supposedly going to be hidden for 75 years from public domain, which have obviously been released bit by bit and analysed by doctors and scientists. So the bit of data I looked at was, several screenshots and pages of, we shouldn't be using it in breastfeeding women, we shouldn't be using it in pregnant women, all throughout those documents, for example. So I focused on pregnancy and one particular study, and this is why it's so alarming, and I use that because it's so bland or obvious. So they excluded, in the Pfizer trial, the original Pfizer trial, they excluded anyone that had anything wrong with them. So you've got to remember that. So the actual trial that they did do rolling out on the world was on healthy people. So anyone who was comorbid or were pregnant or breastfeeding excluded from the trial. Obviously, the birds and the bees, 270 people in that trial got pregnant incidentally and had received the vaccine. And there were 270 of these women. And the 270 women, this again sums up the way that the methods that were being used by the Pfizer trial prior to giving this drug to the world's population. 270 women that were incidentally pregnant. They lost 238 of them to follow up in terms of fetal outcome, i.e., what happened to the baby.
Oh,
They had 32 women left over, so you just lose them. I mean, it's not that difficult to chase up 270 pregnant women, is it? When you're about to inject the whole world to pregnant women. But going back, 32 women left, 5 were outcome pending, so they were still pregnant. 27 cases left to look at. How many children were born out of those 27? Have a guess.
Uh, no clue.
One.
One.
So one child born out of 27. And again, in that document that I'm reading out, that's misinformation, straight off the trial, it says, all the ways that these different babies died, whether it was in utero, out of utero, if they lasted a few minutes and seconds and then died afterwards. So it goes through the different outcomes individually. Then they looked at the adverse reactions in women. So they actually had the outcome for the women, which was really odd. They didn't know what happened to the baby in 230 cases, but they had the adverse outcomes. So 270 women. And I can't remember the exact data now, but it's about half of them. I think something like 47% of them had an adverse reaction. And then they graded those adverse reactions, and half of them, give or take a percentage, were severe adverse reactions, and they go on to list them. And so if you play that back, that's 1 in 4 pregnant women had a severe adverse reaction to the vaccine. And yet they've jumped from that to vaccinating pregnant women. This should be on the BBC tonight. It should be on the ITV and Sky News tonight, but instead it gets removed, and you get the platform for talking about this. And that's just one example. I mean, I've looked at the data itself in the Pfizer trial shows that there is actually no benefit. When you look at the 2 arms, the control arms and the vaccinated arms, there's actually no palpable benefit between the vaccinated group and the unvaccinated group. They lose large swathes of people from both arms, unaccounted for. Just shoddy science, really, and not good medicine.
And with in the Pfizer documents, wasn't there recently the last drop showed that, was it 1,300 people died in the trial? Is that true?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, that's correct. So 1,300 it was. Okay, I've not been that deep. I'll be honest with you, I've not been deep into the latest trial because it is 80,000 or whatever pages. And there's only so many hours of the day, and I've got a young family, so and there's rabbit hole after rabbit hole that you can go down in this area. So yeah, that is true. Something circa 1,300 people died. I mean, I don't know how many deaths it took for the bird flu, the avian flu vaccine, or something like that. 50 deaths, I think it was, and it was pooled.
Wow.
So why is it acceptable to see all this harm in children? I mean, people will argue that it's coincidence, and what the other 235 women, for example, might have had positive outcomes. They might have had live bonny babies, but why not disclose that information? You should know that. If you're performing a robust study. And so, yeah, it just doesn't make sense that we've jumped from. I mean, and you look at the animal data that preceded that. Again, a shambles. I mean, they've gone from rats, completely decimated a bunch of rats, gone into this kind of incidental pregnancy. So they were excluded originally, as I mentioned, and then they've jumped straight into the whole population. Pregnant women, whereby you can't even get a pregnant woman to go and buy an over-the-counter loratadine tablet for their hay fever without a prescription, because the pharmacist saw Jobsworthy and saying, you need a prescription because of the risk. But he's quite happy to jab people, pneumatically through the day at younger and younger, lower and lower risks to, with the point where they're going for 5-year-olds in this country, 5 months old in America. And that data is ridiculous as well. I don't know it as well as other people, but that study whereby the FDA approved the vaccine to go to 5 months old, 5 years old.
I saw Dr. Claire Craig. I saw her analysis of it. It's fascinating.
That's what I was going to say. Claire Craig's done a wonderful piece on social media where she goes through it. And I mean, to say that they voted unanimously based upon the data that Claire presents, it's kind of like we've landed in the twilight zone. It really doesn't make any sense ethically, scientifically. What's going on? How do we explain this?
Yeah, it's crazy. And also, right now you have people in the NIH and CDC and the FDA just leaving in droves because they're just saying this is insane. Why the hell?
And doctors are now. I mean, I was asked in an interview earlier about what's happening with the doctors. They're starting to wake up. I said, not many will still have a conversation with you, and but there's 1 or 2. There's a lot more than there was anyway. Let's say waking up and speaking. But what they're doing is they're kind of taking early retirement to get out of it. Or they're doing much less hours, so they're not being around and in and around the sort of complicity with it all. Or, I mean, this week I've just been informed of 3 suicides in senior doctors and a nurse, all in the same week at a certain hospital in Ireland, I think it was. So people are topping themselves rather than face the music here, which is an alarming. Because people are going to. I mean, this data is so easy to find if people are only willing to see it and look for it. Everything I quote, like that Pfizer data I've just gone through. Find that and see the page reference. And you can read it for yourself, but people seem to not want to spend that time to read about this drug that is novel and is experimental. And that to me is clinical and criminal negligence from a doctor. These are people who are there to, look after you from cradle to grave. People trust them with their lives, their secrets, and mental health, their babies. And these people can't be bothered to read a document that I put in front of them. They'll just throw it aside and say, oh, conspiracy theorists. I don't want to read this. You're upsetting my coffee break. Guys, seriously, this is like really important stuff. I wouldn't be bleating about it all the time if it wasn't, massive consequences on humanity. I've never known, this has been unprecedented, this has, to be treated like this. I mean, there's about 10 or 15 doctors in this country that are speaking out openly. There's a lot more sort of gently speaking out, but I've got boundaries to what they're saying. They want to keep the jobs and the mortgage. I understand
Well,
that
they won't
completely.
go on like news. Like there's people who are signed for like organisations like the CCVAG and then Heart and then NHS 100K. But there are people involved with that. But I feel like going on TV and stuff, people don't want to be associated with the person who's interviewing, and the only people who interview people tend to be, GB News or independent people. But like BBC News should be doing this. They should be interviewing you. They should be having a public debate where they get Chris Whitty or whoever the fuck, and they get someone else. They get you, Dr. Steve James, Dr. Claire Craig.
Honestly, mate, I've emailed Hillary Jones. I mean, Hillary Jones is the biggest misinformation spreader, and I'll name him now. I've offered him, I've emailed him, I've Twittered him, I've got Seti Javid. I mean, we write to him through the Heart and the CCBAG, as you mentioned, but we also, I've personally emailed them saying, look, let's have a conversation about this. Let's talk about it. I mean, it shouldn't be that difficult to tie up a quack, loony conspiracy theorist who's misquoting data. It should be simple, shouldn't it? If it's safe and effective, you should have a plethora of data that you can tie me up in knots with. Let's do it on mainstream media. And that's what I challenge these bots on Twitter to. Let's have a mainstream media. Just the day before, this has happened twice now, where one of the trolls, acclaimed scientist, has offered me out for a debate. It's all been set up. I get suspended the day before. And the same thing happened again. We were just about, all these bots came swarming. Said, let's do a debate. The only thing I stipulate, it has to be, you say you're well connected, let's stipulate it needs to be on mainstream media, live TV, and we can do 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 3-on-3. You can name. I even offered the guy to choose the questions to go first or second to his, whichever he preferred, and then again suspended again within 3 hours of that challenge going in. So there's no coincidence there. But I know that they haven't got a leg to stand on. I mean, it's basic stuff like, if a patient doesn't want a treatment, they don't need to have one. Can anyone argue contrary to that? But, so for me, I don't get into the business of pinching my patient's nose and pouring the medicine down their neck. That would be classed as assault battery and all sorts of ethical issues around that. If people say no, they can say no. But in this country, if you say no, it costs you your job. You're a carer. It costs you your reputation. You're a doctor. I can vouch for that one. And it costs you your ability to travel. It costs you your ability to. I've just watched a video of some poor old lady going into Canada. I don't know if you've seen it, Canada, and she's checking in, and they've got one of these border force people that said, look, you need to download this vax passport. She said, look, I've had three jabs here. They're saying you need to go into quarantine unless you download this app and some sort of digital ID system. And then they ended up putting her in quarantine, this poor little old lady who'd gone to the trouble of having all the vaccines that have been required of her, being in lockdown whenever the government have told her to be in lockdown. Just doesn't make sense.
Wow.
The same way as like the NHS 100K, they, I never saw the issue with the person being unvaccinated. As I mentioned, when you're unvaccinated, it stops you from being protected. That's all. And that's your personal decision if you don't want to do that. And so if you've got a person who's willing to work, who's unvaccinated, who's willing to wear a mask, who's willing to test daily and to face patients that are vaccinated and masked, then there's no issue between that unvaccinated nurse and the vaccinated nurse in terms of who's the biggest biohazard. I mean, if that nurse who's unvaccinated gets COVID, that's their own fault. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
I mean, it's completely nuts that there still hasn't been the change and like pendulum swing of the conversation. Because for me, I think there's just countless study, countless experts all around the world. Denmark, Sweden, Israel, doesn't matter where it is. There's experts coming out in droves. There's people leaving, the NIH, CDC, FDA, people leaving parts of the UK, resigning. At what point is the needle going to move? And there's going to be...
It is black and white. I mean, you look at there's two things I would say, like all-cause mortality. So if we park COVID for a little bit, more people in this country, in this world, are now dying from all other causes. I mean, you see the insurance companies now speaking out, saying, look, we're paying out some big money
Yeah, in
here to come
Germany.
people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Germany, yeah, and there's a guy in France as well, millionaire, who actually, and sinister outcome of that thing. I don't know if you saw it. They put it down as suicide. Apparently, his death. This multimillionaire guy in France, and he died after the vaccine, and they wouldn't pay out because they said it's suicide, and he was, in full view of the facts. The facts are all out there. He chose to take the vaccine. That's his own fault. So they're playing that, and you're seeing subtle reports of that coming through. The other thing I would mention, I think I'm going blank. I've gone blank.
Yeah, like
It's the heat in this.
do you know the Dr. Steve James moment in was it Hospital with Savage Javid? What I'm thinking is there has got to be a moment where that happens with the vaccine. There's got to be a moment where all of a sudden something explodes and there's this just conversation around it.
A couple of examples of that are the people we need to try and wake up to explode. These are the same people who are sat in the car on their own with a mask on. I mean, I did a Zoom the other week, and the two people I was doing the Zoom with were both in their home offices with masks on. There's a picture going around on the internet of a woman doing lengths in the swimming pool with a mask
Oh yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah.
This is just incredible stuff, and we've got to try and snap these people out of it. I mean, Steve James spoke out. I mean, that's the biggest travesty of them all. If you've had the disease, and I've heard Fauci say this with his own lips in sort of old clips, that the best vaccine you can get is the disease. My own son at the moment's got chickenpox, and we're talking about chickenpox party over the weekend because actually, surprise, surprise, newsflash, your innate immune system, natural immunity actually has kept us pretty well. People will bring their children around to a chickenpox party to get the virus as young as you can get it, and knowing it's going to pass around, and they come out with their spots and it's self-limiting. What happened to that? The old kind of old-fashioned chickenpox parties now. People's immunity, and it's incredible that people are being made to have a vaccine when they've had the disease. So it's like having flu and then giving you the flu vaccine after the flu. Well, you've had the flu, you've got antibodies and memory cells that will stay in your bone marrow forever for the next flu attack. Poison around to go, why are we vaccinated? And trebly so. The people that very early on in this, when they were unvaccinated, when jab 1 came along, were saying, look, I've got antibodies. People are proving they've got antibodies with blood tests. That's why you have a vaccine, to get antibodies to the antigen that's put into your body. But they're vaccinating people who've got antibodies, which just and the outcomes for them now we're seeing in the last few months is that they're seeming to get more and more vaccine, more and more COVID, should I say, and they've had four vaccines. And the countries like Israel, as you touched on, they're the highest vaccinated country, and their death figures and their case figures through the roof as we speak. And then you look at the countries south of Africa, Nigeria, they've got the lowest count of vaccines for their population, the lowest counts and the lowest deaths. And then you speak to people about that, and they say, "Oh, data capture must be poor because it's Africa. It's not robust statistical analysis, etc." No, the unvaccinated countries are doing much better. You're seeing things like Sweden. They didn't do all the lockdown. They didn't do all the draconian stuff, and their outcomes were much better than their neighbouring country, Denmark, who went full on draconian. The comparisons and the outcomes are no different or better in the people who didn't do anything, just carried on about their lives. We had a government that was paying for half of your meals, eat out to help out. The next week, they were banning you from funerals and making you stand 2 yards apart in the garden. It's just incredible amount of, making it up as you go along.
Yes, it's fascinating. This is from a viewer who, because I said you were coming to the show, so he basically wanted to ask, this is his question, shout out Bill if you're listening. He said, what's the worst side effect he's experienced from the vaccine? I think he means patient-wise, what's the worst?
Well, death in a few. Death in a few. I've seen people who've had death within a week of having the vaccine. So that's one story that I've shared publicly. In one particular week, we had 2 women in their 40s that had the AstraZeneca jab, and they died one was within, I think, 4 days, one was within 7 days of having the vaccine. And the very same day, I was told about a 41-year-old man who had 24 hours prior had the AstraZeneca jab, and he'd got brain clot, a central cerebral venous thrombosis. And, I've raised the attention to my bosses at the time and said, look, we need to stop giving it. They're all AstraZeneca. So I said, look, for now, good medicine would be stop giving AstraZeneca. That same week, they carried on vaccinating with AstraZeneca. So death being one of them. But, I don't think there's a headline case aside from the deaths. I mean, I've seen everything. everything with my own eyes. So it's not me making up. I've seen strange neurological things. I've seen strange skin conditions that I've never seen before. Strange autoimmune, like people's joints swelling up and not being able to wiggle their fingers and toes the day after the vaccine. I mean, what else could it be? You know, you have the jab and your hands and your feet and your elbows and your knees swell up. What else could it be?
Mm.
Like
And
I say,
also
and
the
now I'm a little bit more involved in vaccine injury stuff now, so I could tell you some horror stories, but not one particular one stands out other than it's utterly debilitating people,
mm,
making them disabled when they were previously fit, healthy, military people, let's say, for example, and they can't move their fingers, their toes, their muscles are wasting away, they're fitting on the floor. People have lost limbs. You know, there's people who have been very public about having the jab and within a week or two losing their limb through an amputation. And these people exist, but no one knows about them because they're not on mainstream media. Like you say, doctors like me aren't on mainstream media. These victims aren't. Mark Steen's just done a thing on GB News, hasn't he, where he's put a couple of widows on
mm,
that have lost their husbands, you know, and the death's not up for discussion. It's been reported by a coroner that the death was due to the vaccine. I posted that interview on Instagram and it was removed for spreading misinformation.
wow,
It was an interview with a widow who's got the death certificate there, ready to go, you know.
wow.
So yeah, I've seen it all.
Yes. Yeah. Well. Yeah. Well answered. He'll love that. That answer because he's fascinated with it, and so many people around the UK. You know, if what Dr. Cartland, what Dr. Steve James, what all these doctors around the UK and experts, and also the world are saying, you know, debate them. That's the thing which does it for me. If
That's
you
all I
guys are
want.
so wrong, then have it out. But there's not
Yeah.
that. You get
And do
banned.
you know what? I
Yeah.
will be happy to be proven wrong, believe me, because if what we're seeing and talking about in this conversation and other conversations, that it's pretty dark stuff. If the government is willingly doing this to children, knowing that there's potential for harm or lack of safety data, let's say, then there's a sinister element to this, surely, and it is dark. And like I say, you see political debates, you're seeing it even now, like the Tory party, they're going to be debating and who's the best candidate. You know, in all good areas of science, and that's what science is. It's about make a hypothesis. I think this treatment's going to help this, and then you've got to set about proving it or disproving it. Hypothesis, and that's people will debate and disagree and say, "Oh, that's not right. You've used the wrong method. I think you should try that because there's a bit of bias here." And discussing it and debating it. But I literally haven't had in the whole 12 months I've been doing this now had a one-on-one conversation with anyone who's willing to go further than 2 minutes into it. The ones that do agree, like I say, ex-bosses that have agreed not to vaccinate kids, go completely against it. I mean, this trust at the moment, I've been secretly agreed with by so many doctors, yet are quite happy to not come alongside me when it comes to things like wearing masks in a heat wave. I mean, it's just logic, isn't it? What, you wouldn't put your dog in a mask in this heat wave, would you?
Mm. Yeah. Absolutely crazy. I guess. What's one message, I guess, for like people who kind of think you're chatting absolute nonsense? What's your message to them?
My message is that firstly, the credentials that I've got give me a kind of qualified for. Secondly, pretty much everything I say is referenced. Pretty much 90% of it, 95%. I put the odd cheeky meme up on social media, but everything is referenced. And all I would say is when anyone makes a claim on the opposite side of the narrative, simple question to them, simple rebuttal, where's the evidence? So I don't know if you watched that Unvaccinated on the BBC the other night.
Yeah, yeah,
They
that's the
were
one I
coming
was
out. They
talking.
were
Yeah,
they
yeah.
were coming out with some wild statistics. Wild statistics. I'll give you one example. They were tipping jelly beans out on the table, utterly patronising to these people, and quoted something like the myocarditis risk is 1 in 33,000. Utter nonsense. There's a study in Hong Kong that shows it's much, much less than that, in
Mm,
the order of 1 in 1,600. So, if parents knew that actually it was 1 in 1,600, that's not, when you think of a football stadium full of people, how many kids that would affect if you go around and vaccinate every single one of them. That's not, the mild headache and site injection pain that they're telling you at the point of when they're injecting you. They're not telling you about the fertility studies that are now out in the open. I mean, if you go to your vaccine centre with the full intention to get jabbed and just ask them these questions. Is there any evidence on infertility? Is there any evidence of vaccine injury that you know of? What's in the vaccine? Like I say, I've got a letter from the Royal College of General Practitioners president that says the reason we can't counsel patients on the long-term safety data and medium safety data is because it doesn't exist. Got that in black and white. And
wow.
the second thing is, which really should shut the whole argument down, is I've got it in black and white. I can share that with you if you want to share that on your platform. Is the second statement is even worse. It says the reason we can't tell people what's in the vaccine, in the injection, in the vial, is because we do not know the ingredients. And I've got that from the RCGP president. That's the end of the argument as far as I'm concerned when it comes to consent. If the injector doesn't know what's in the diluent of the vaccine, then you might as well go home. It's battery this week. If you don't know what you're injecting, then
Wow.
correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, absolutely crazy.
Why is that not on the BBC? I mean, I've shared it all around, but why is that not on the headlines? Why is that not front page of the Sun? It should be. If I contacted the Sun and said, I've got this document, guys, read it, put it on your front page tomorrow, you wouldn't get an answer to the email, you wouldn't get an answer to the call.
I mean, hopefully you'll get your Twitter reinstated. Hopefully there'll be a reinstate Cartland. And maybe
there is actually, yeah.
There
is. If you want to publicise it, it's hashtag reinstate Dr. David Cartland. Right, it's not really took off, to be honest, like Tony Hinton's did. But,
yeah, have you spoke with Alan or anything about getting that hashtag? Do you know Alan Miller?
No. If you want to get it going, if you know a way to get that going.
Yeah, I'll try and message one of the people who works there. I'll see if she can talk to Alan about getting that going.
Yeah. I mean, Twitter is a bit of a cesspit of people, but yeah, it's been. I mean, that's the thing. People. I mean, I've got a lot of friends in the village, and like social media, you can do without it. But actually, in terms of this is a lonely business doing what I'm doing down here, geographically speaking, as well. I'm right down in Land's End, so it's pretty lonely geographically. But you lose those connections from your LinkedIn connections and your conversations with Twitter. Those doctors that have started to reach out to me saying, "I've had an epiphany here. I've had a eureka moment. Can we talk to you? Can you support us through that? Because I've been injecting children," and then you lose them. And that's what I miss from Twitter, rather than the troll attacks and the abuse that you get. It was quite a supportive re-dip back into it, actually. I mean, like I said, the follower count went up and so much support from people. So yeah, hashtag, reinstate Dr. David Cartland.
Yeah.
Get it going.
Get that going. Come on. Oh, well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Gone into a lot. Yeah, let's fucking get you back on Twitter, and also let's hope the needle moves and the conversations which need to be spoken about happen, because to be fair, even though the documentary was horrendous and it didn't show the other side at all, at least they're talking about it. That is a beginning.
Yeah, I think even I'd say actually all the people that I know that are queuing up for their autumn booster have watched that, and because it was so blatant propaganda and so blatant patronising to those people that were in it, I've seen a few of them speak on GB News yesterday and on the on it, just saying, and then they had Norman Fenton going through.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, that's brilliant.
Issues, and it's just like, how are they getting away with this? I mean, Ofcom needs to know about this, and I think Ofcom will find out about it. There's just no due diligence here where. I mean, that guy at the end in ITU coming out saying, "Oh, what was it? 20 out of 21 people in my department were COVID positive." And for a fact that those 21 that were COVID positive are 21 people that have got broken legs, strokes, post-surgery, post-heart attacks. Don't mention that though. They're in ITU and they're COVID positive.
And also, I wonder how many of them had the first one, but just not the second one. Like, what's the definition of vaccinated either?
Well, again, that's another lottery, isn't it? I mean, change the definition to who knows what unvaccinated means.
It went from like 1 to 3. A lot of countries, you're not vaccinated unless you've had 3. So it's like, what is the... Yeah, there's...
I mean, I remember I just shared something really quickly at the end. It's at the very beginning when they were vaccinating people with a particular brand. Again, there were very loose reasons why you go for Pfizer instead of AstraZeneca, instead of Moderna. I mean, AstraZeneca disappeared off the radar, didn't it? So, but anyway, if you had Pfizer, you had to have Pfizer again and again, because that's what the evidence suggested. Now, I never ever saw that evidence, but it was supposed that the evidence showed you. So we had rounds with patients who said there's a bit of like vaccine snobbery at the beginning about, Pfizer's better than Moderna, and Moderna's not as good as AstraZeneca. And so there was this kind of rumour mill. So people would ring you up and say, I want Pfizer next. I've had AstraZeneca, I want Pfizer next. And you'd say, no, the evidence is absolutely categoric, even though no one knew what that citation was for the evidence. You need to have the AstraZeneca. And you get called all sorts of names and have complaints from patients. I mean, now, ask patients what they've had. I had one of them, pinch of this, pinch of AstraZeneca, 2 Moderna, AstraZeneca. And I mean, where's the science there? Just have what's left in the fridge. Is that what they're doing now? I mean, they extended even the expiry date. So they were using the vials. They have to be super cold. They have to come in under frozen temperatures and thaw out, and you have to use them within a certain amount of time. And there are expiry dates on them. And at the end, you get rid of excess stock again. They're just extending the expiry date. So ignore the expiry date on the vial. I think it'll be all right. It's like when you've got bread that's gone out of date, stick it in the toaster if there's no mold on it, and you just crack on and eat it. That's what they were doing with the Pfizer vaccine. I'll just give it a couple more weeks. Where's the evidence for that?
Yeah,
insanity.
wow. That sounds crazy. It's been an absolute pleasure, though. Thank you for coming on. I think a lot of people have learned a bunch in this, and it would have opened so many people's eyes to a different perspective, a different take. What isn't being talked about on the BBC, the conversations that are not happening, that are not being spoken about. So thank you for coming on. Where can people catch you?
I've got left now. I've got Getter. I've got Instagram, but under a shadow ban. And then I'm on this Truth Social. I've just took a dabble on that now, and I'll be back on Facebook for 5 days time, but I'm sure I'll be banned again. So
and hopefully
I'll keep
you get
doing
back
what I'm
on
doing.
Twitter with that massive fan base, which is growing rapidly. Hopefully.
Yeah. I'm breaking America next week. Apparently, I've got a few podcasts in America.
Oh really?
So.
Oh shit!
Somebody told me I was big in America. I didn't know I was big in America.
Got on Joe Rogan soon enough. That'd be amazing.
Rebel News. That's the one.
Oh,
I think they're
Rebel
quite
News,
big. Canada, Rebel News. Yeah, that's one of them.
Australia.
Is that Australia, Rebel
Yeah,
News?
but they do a lot of American stuff, but they're based in Australia.
There you go. News to me. I'll find out when I speak to them.
Love that. Well, anyway, thanks so much for watching. Share this with a friend, someone who needs to hear it, someone who needs to hear the conversations which have been spoken about today. Your mum, your dad, your brother, your friend, I don't know, whoever needs to hear this conversation, share this podcast with them, because it is going to be a Spotify exclusive, because if I put it on YouTube, I will get banned for the 6th time, so I'm not going to put it on YouTube. But yeah, thanks so much for joining. Drop a like, please subscribe, give it the 5 stars if you're listening on Apple and Spotify. Catch Dr. Cartland on his Getter and all the socials. Catch you all Thursday, 6 o'clock next week. Peace.